Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the latest episode of the Writers Podcast. I have with me today writer Zachary Hagen. Good morning, Zach. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
Not a problem. And you are a writer of what type of fiction?
So currently, what I have been focusing on has been fantasy, but I'm open to branching out in the future, depending
Okay.
on my interests.
All right. And your latest book is Eternity's End, which is book 5 of the Eternal Chronicles series.
That's correct. It came out this last October.
Okay. And what's your elevator pitch for the book?
So the book is the last chapter of the Eternal Chronicles, and it picks up right where Elior and his friends are working on this project given to them by the world's deity, and they are preparing for the final battle between good and evil, where the evil and crazed Taariq will finally either win or meet his end.
Ooh, so it's a big climax.
Yes.
Um, so, and your other books in the series are um, there's other 4 other books I can see here. Eternity's Well, Eternity's Mirror, Eternity's is that Refuge, and
Refuge.
Eternity's Edge.
Edge. Hmm.
Right. Okay. So where does the series take place in an alternate reality or?
Sort of its own world.
Mhm.
So it takes place in initially the characters only know it as Lux Terra, but by the end they know it as Lux Eternitas because the world is kind of interesting in that it is a flat world, but it has two sides like a coin.
Oh, that's interesting. Flat earthers will be happy about that. Uh,
I mean, maybe, but the concept of space still actually exists in the
okay.
world. So maybe not quite so much. I did
Ah.
not do it for the benefit of flat Earth, but more so the fantastical idea of having a two-sided world.
Okay. And how does one get from one side to the other?
Initially, it is through that Eternity's Mirror, so we get to visit the
Okay.
other side for the first time in the second book.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Eternity's Mirror. And is that a man-made device or?
It was a gift from the world's deity, Aelon, or the Great Spirit, depending on who you ask, to
Mhm.
the dragons before their rebellion.
Oh, okay. So there's dragons.
In a sense, the dragons are sort of on hiatus until
Oh,
the
okay.
very end because of their rebellion. They were transformed into Jinn because of their rebellion against Aelon and the order of the world.
Okay. Very interesting. So, where did the idea for this series come from?
There's several sources. So initially, I took bits and pieces from like Avatar: The Last Airbender, The Secret Circle, um, and several other um, IPs, movies, books, but it sort of morphed when I had this idea to tell the story of Jesus through the eyes of his disciples, but set in that world, and that completely transformed the background of the story. Because initially, the main character Elior was his main mission in the first book. He's trying to rescue his brother, figure out a way to do that. And
Mm.
initially, his goal was to become the most powerful sorcerer in the world in order to find a way to do that. But as I was writing it with that bend, he felt like more of a villain than someone that you would actually want to root for. And
Okay.
so I pivoted and created a new character that would serve as sort of the connection that he would need to rescue his brother. and that became the Jesus character. And Elior had other friends that joined him, and they became the disciples, and it blossomed from there into a much more interesting story, to the point where I would really consider this sort of the spiritual successor to the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that was about my question, or something I was going to lead to my next question. Were you a big fantasy reader growing up?
I absolutely was. C.S.
Okay.
Lewis, The Chronicles of Narnia was the first series that I actually read. My parents got the 7 book series for me all at once as a Christmas present.
Mm.
And I don't know if they've re illustrated the covers, but they were such beautiful covers. And I was relatively young, and so the covers were beautiful. They intrigued me. And so I read the series, and that was what sort of really sparked my love of reading.
Mm. Okay. And where did you go from the Chronicles?
I think immediately I loved series a lot more than standalone books.
Mm-hmm.
And so I jumped into Lemony Snicket's um, A Series of Unfortunate Events.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, very different from Chronicles of Narnia,
Right.
but equally as enthralling. And I love the emotional depth that he gave his characters, especially in a children's book series.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what do you have other favorite series or authors that you read growing up?
Absolutely. I was a voracious reader for a great many years now. I very rarely get to read for pleasure. I
Yeah.
do a lot more audiobooks now than I do sitting down and reading, but I think I read almost the entire Hunger Games series in
Mm-hmm.
about a 24-hour period.
Wow.
That was a big one for me. Also, Christopher Paolini's Inheritance Cycle. I did not read that in a 24-hour period, that it would be a physical impossibility unless you can read chapters at a time,
Mm.
barely glancing at pages. Um, and the Rick Riordan works, especially his work with Egyptian and Greek mythology, I thought were really interesting. The Norwegian to some extent as well.
Okay. Okay. And at what point did you decide you wanted to become a writer?
I actually wanted to write before I loved to read, sort of the opposite way that most people go.
Right.
But um, the big push to become a writer started when I was in college, and it was a class I was taking as part of my English minor that was supposed to teach us how to map the publication maze. That was actually the title of the class, Mapping the Publication Maze. And so I had the first 12 chapters of Eternity's Mirror written because of that class. And I wasn't really planning to do anything more with it seriously. I mean, in the back of my mind, I was like, I would love to finish that book.
Mm-hmm.
But then I was teaching my first year in the classroom, and my students told me that they hadn't read the Chronicles of Narnia, and I asked why not. It's such a fantastic book series, and they said because it's too old. And that's when I knew I need to finish this book, because it's the same message, but it's packaged in a way that's going to be more accessible to modern readers.
Okay.
Because frankly, the medieval fantasy world isn't as appealing to some as it is to others. And while I enjoyed it, I know that the feeling of old and antiquity isn't as accessible for some younger readers. So
Right.
my books are not set in a medieval world. It is set in a modern world that happens to have magic.
Mm.
So it's a little bit different. It's a little bit more accessible, kind of a blend between sci-fi and fantasy. So it's a fun mix.
Right. And do you consider your series, is it a YA series or adult
I
or?
would I would consider it YA. I think there are definitely some adult elements.
Mm-hmm.
It's not sexual, at least in an explicit manner. It is alluded to
Mm-hmm.
in the later books, but um, it's not something that I would consider inappropriate for between 11 and up. I think that would still be appropriate for that age group.
Okay. And so the age of your characters in the book, are they teenagers then or?
late teens
Late
and
teens?
moving into their early 20s towards the end of the series.
Okay. So that's given that the scope of your story and the import of what's happening in these stories, it's interesting that you've chosen younger characters. Usually, I would think they would be more adult characters. Was that presented a challenge to you, or not?
I don't think so. I think that oftentimes youth is discounted, but there's a certain quality that young people tend to have where they don't consider risks and they tend to go headlong into whatever's in front of them just to meet a goal. And while I'm starting to really grow out of that myself, it does make for interesting characters. And I think that the because you wouldn't expect a character in their 30s or 40s to get into trouble that they made for themselves as much
Hmm.
because they're going to be thinking things through a little bit more.
Right.
Whereas the fallibility of youth often creates problems for itself, which means that you have more conflict in a book, and that's more interesting to read about. I mean, I think of The Lord of the Rings, which I also enjoyed, and like the main characters in that were in their 50s, I think. I
Hmm.
think Bilbo Baggins was like 53 or something like that for his initial
Right.
adventure.
Right.
And his conflicts are more circumstantial, things happening to him rather than not knowing what to do and stumbling around, which isn't
Right.
necessarily a bad thing. But for me, I had a harder time getting through The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. While I love the movies, that is one of the very few instances where I actually think the movies are better.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was a wise decision on the filmmaker's part to make the characters younger, for sure, especially the hobbits. But yeah.
Not even the youth. It's just they cut out a lot of things that don't actually add to the plot. I mean, J.R.R.
Hmm.
Tolkien was an incredible writer, very rich writing style, but it is also incredibly dense
Yep.
and
Yeah.
lengthy and
Hmm.
extemporaneous.
Yeah. All right. So let's turn back to Eternity's End then. Though just before we get too far into it, so this is a 5 book series. Did you know that at the start?
Hmm.
How many books it was going to be?
Um, yes and no. I knew the scope of where the story had to go,
Right.
and so I anticipated being able to tell the whole story in 3 books initially,
Mm.
but as I was getting towards the end of Eternity's Well, I realized if I don't end it right there,
Hmm.
these books are going to be like 500 pages each because the whole every book in the series has over 200 pages.
Mm.
The first book is the longest. It's about 85,000 words. But a lot of that, about 10,000 words, I would say, is probably the world building and setting up the
Right.
ideas of the characters in the reader's head. The
Hmm.
other books are each about 70 to 75,000 words, which is a good length for a YA fantasy book. And if that was in 3 volumes, they would be very hefty and they would be hard to manage as far as where to cut things off.
Mm.
Um, the series just functioned better as a 5 act separate book entity than trying to cram everything into a 3 act trilogy that would have had 500 or 600 page books.
Okay. And as you mentioned off the top, there's 4 main characters, uh, protagonists: Elior and Nereza, Opal, and Nyx.
Yes, although Nereza doesn't make her appearance until the second book.
Okay. And who of the 4, who do you consider them equal, or do you have one that's the main character?
Yeah. Elior is definitely the main character. He has this sort of he I think has the most growth, which is
Okay.
why I would probably consider him the main character. I had a group of students read the book the first year that it came out, and a lot of them described Elior as very whiny and kind of
Mm,
annoying to read because of that. And I would say that that's accurate. In the first
mm,
book, Elior is, you're definitely rooting for him because of his circumstances, and you can understand why he's a little bit whiny and weepy.
mm-hmm.
But by the end of the series, he's an entirely different person. His circumstances and the things that he's had to do and weather have changed him and grown him into the kind of person that I think most people would be able to respect.
Okay. And are any of the other characters, is Nereza, is that female or male, or are they all male characters?
Nereza is a female. Nereza
Okay.
is a female. Opal is also a female. Nyx is the other male in the
Okay.
four main characters.
And is there any romantic subplots, triangles, or anything going on there?
Not so much love triangles, but definitely romantic subplots.
Okay.
Nereza and Elior were sort of the initial plan for romance. I had several readers requesting that I integrate romance into the series after
Mm-hmm.
the first book came out. And so Nereza was designed primarily to fill that role, and then as time went on, other relationships also developed in the
Okay.
cast.
And what? Uh, so it sounds like Elior's on a hero's journey arc. Is that correct? Or
I would definitely say that
okay.
there's heavy elements of that hero's journey, um, probably exactly to a T. I think at one point I actually had the hero's journey in front of me trying to figure out how he fit into it. So there may be some deviation, but it's pretty cut and dry. I mean, it's a
Okay.
fantasy book, so some of those tropes are sort of inescapable and they're expected by readers.
Right. Right. Um, so what about Nereza then? Like, it sounded like you created her to bring a romantic plot into it, but does she have any? Does she have a driving force beyond being just a supporting character? I guess you could say for Elior, because I know one of the big things is
Yeah.
uh, female characters not passing the Bactel test, where their only
Yes.
existence is to promote the male character.
Yeah, I mean, she was created because I needed a romantic interest, but I
Hmm.
was very aware that, like, it's a Christian fantasy series.
Hmm.
And I was not going to make the mistake of having female characters that weren't just as valuable
Hmm.
as the male ones. And so I was very conscious of the fact that she needed to have her own interests.
Okay.
Now, it, she does turn her interests towards supporting what they're all doing, but she
Okay.
has conversations with Opal. She has conversations with other female characters that have nothing to do with her romantic relationship. And um, she's talented and strong in her own right.
Hmm.
And really, she does more of the initial pursuing of Elior than the other way around, I would say. And I
Mm.
think that also has a bit of strength in it because she is a character that knows what she wants
Mm.
and she does go after it. I mean, even her initial joining of the party is really more of her talents. It wasn't because she was interested in Elior, but because she had a skill and a way to help, and she was interested in it.
Okay. Very good. Now, uh, are Opal and Nyx more like, are they more like the comic relief characters, or?
I would say it to a certain point. I would not classify Opal as comic relief whatsoever. She is such a serious character. She started
Mm.
out as a princess whose father died and was quickly thrust into being a queen and then was deposed. So she had a lot forced onto her in the first book, but Nyx is definitely more funny.
Mm.
The running joke, especially in the first book, is that he never stops thinking about food. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that he was absolutely inspired by Sokka from the Avatar: The Last Airbender series.
Okay.
He's a little sarcastic. He's focused on his stomach, so there's definitely inspiration from that particular character there.
Right.
And he's
Right.
also a warrior.
Mm. Very good. Now, but I was going to ask you that. What about the other characters? Are any of them based on real life people, or?
Um, I used to think when I initially started writing the series that Elior was based on me, but now I don't really think so. He's become very much his own person, and so
Mm,
maybe initially there were some traits that were imprinted, but largely because, especially in the first book, he's grieving something. And at the time that I
mm,
finished writing the book, I had gone through a lot of losses.
mm,
Actually, I lost my job, and that's what allowed me the time and space to finish the book.
right.
Um, because my severance package was enough for me to live on until I could get to another school year and to another school.
Mm,
No one's hiring teachers in January.
right.
Um, and so I channeled the grief, and so there's definitely more of me and Elior in the first book,
Mm,
but we grew in different directions. I would
right.
say there's still similarities, but we're not nearly the same as we were. Opal, even though she and Elior do not end up together, I took some inspiration from my wife and also the Kristen Stewart depiction of Snow White from Snow White and the Huntsman, because there's sort of a serious strength there, but still very feminine.
Mm,
So
okay. Very good. Did your characters ever do anything that you were not expecting them to do?
yes, although more so the villains,
Oh,
um,
okay. Okay.
because there were villains that changed so drastically, either towards more of an evil bend or actually their character arcs brought them away from evil. There are unexpected redemption arcs that I didn't see coming until I was
Mm,
because I developed the characters pretty fully before I start writing them.
okay.
But there's one character that, and I don't want to spoil it, but there's one character that no one, when they read through the books, should even expect to make a different decision
Okay.
until they're making it.
Mm, okay.
So
Very
the
cool.
cast of villains was very interesting in that way.
Right. Okay. And the main villain is Tarek?
Taariq, yes,
Tariq, sorry. And tell us about her or him.
him. So
Him.
Taariq is the leader of the Jinn, and he was originally called Solarium when he was a dragon.
Okay.
He was transformed. He was the one that led the rebellion. He's tremendously old, almost as old as the world itself. And he is determined to rip Aelon, the Great Spirit, off of his throne and to take over the world for himself and remake it in his own image.
Hmm. And was it more fun for you to write the villain than the hero?
I wouldn't necessarily say fun.
Hmm.
Actually, Tariq's actions and attitudes towards things kind of scared me at times
Hmm.
because in the beginning, he's so calculated and specific with what he's doing. He has a well worked out plan. It's functioning exactly as he means it to until it doesn't. And then he slowly descends into insanity.
Hmm.
By the end, almost nothing he does works, but it still causes a lot of damage and hurts people.
Hmm.
And it's unpredictable and frightening.
Hmm. Did you find that hard to write
I, I don't know if I necessarily found it hard.
or
I
uncomfortable?
think it just uncomfortable, I would say, because there
Hmm.
are definitely things that he did in the books that were really difficult to write
Hmm.
emotionally. From the practice of it, it flowed really well, but there were definitely times where I had to step back from the computer and I'm like, I can't believe that my characters are doing that. I mean, he's a villain, so of course he has to be bad.
Right.
But it's the fact that some of those things were imagined, obviously, by me, and that was kind of hard to cope with. You know, I
Right.
kind of had to stick with that for a while.
Okay. So your series is complete now, correct?
Hmm.
What lies in your future?
Currently, I have another book that's going to be coming out this November. I'm shooting for November 18th, as long as editors and everything are okay with that date.
Hmm.
And it is a retelling of the Aladdin tale through the
Oh,
eyes of the princess with a bit of a twist.
oh, okay, interesting. And is that a one-off then?
That's going to be a one-off. I felt like I needed to do something that wasn't a series, just to kind of get a breather rather than
Sure.
jumping into another multi-year project.
Right, a palate cleanser, so to speak.
Hmm.
And are you looking beyond that book?
I have several other books that are slated. There's one book in particular that I feel like could turn into another big fantasy series.
Mm,
It's going to take some planning for that one. I do have I have a working title for it, which I love, which I'm happy to share.
sure.
And that's Not All Witches Are Ugly. So that one is
Nice,
so
nice.
that one I think is going to be fun. I haven't decided exactly the scope of that. I have a certain idea that's workable, but it'll probably change because
Right.
it's too
Okay, and
early to say exactly what it'll be.
okay, interesting. Good luck with that. Now, all your books are available in the usual places?
They're all available on Amazon. A couple of them are available for special order at different stores.
Hmm.
Currently working on getting that to be more expensive, but
Right,
most people buy their books from Amazon anyway, so they're
right.
really
And
accessible.
are they all print, or do you do audio at all, or?
The first book is available via audio. I try not to operate on debt or speculation, so
Hmm.
I'm waiting for it to make its money back on audio before I do another one in audio. Either that or I need a different way to do
Okay.
it because it's
And
expensive to do that.
right, you hired a professional narrator, or did you do it
I
yourself?
did.
Hmm.
I hired a professional narrator, and it sounds fantastic.
Okay,
I loved it. He did an amazing job.
very cool. And people can find out more about you at your website.
They can. It's going to be updated here as soon as the school year's over. So
Okay.
it's a little out of date right now,
Oh, okay.
but so new things we put up. I'm planning a color swap with it. So it'll be a new website this summer once I'm done with the school
And
year.
it is currently Hagen,
ZacharyHagenWrites.com.
right?
Yeah.
Scott.com. All right. Well, is there anything else that you want to mention that hasn't come up yet?
I don't think so. I think we covered pretty much everything. It was a great interview. You asked some great questions.
Okay, awesome. I try to do my best. And I thank you for your time, Zachary, and I wish you all the luck with your future projects.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Not a problem. Take care now. Till next time.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.